When we think of ancient Greece, we often think of marble temples, famous philosophers, and great stories about gods and heroes. The birthplace of Western civilization. Most of us don't know this, but the ancient world was much more connected and diverse than you might think. For thousands of years, the people of the Aegean and the great civilizations of Africa had a rich and complicated relationship. This story of trade, war, mythology, and mutual respect has often been left out of history books. This is the story of Africans in ancient Greece, and it is made up of myths, historians' accounts, and beautiful, undeniable evidence from historical artifacts. The ancient Greeks called Africa Ethiopia, which means land of the burnt-faced people. In the earliest Greek poems, the Homeric epics from the 8th century BC, these Ethiopians are shown as a distant, semi-mythical people living on the edge of the world. People thought they were holy and special, so much so that the gods would come to Ethiopia to eat with them. This depiction indicates a profound respect and intrigue for Africans from the inception of Greek literature. A black figure amphora by Exekias, one of the best-known vase painters of ancient Greece, shows the fight between Achilles and the Ethiopian king Memnon, around 535 BCE, found at the British Museum. The legendary king of Ethiopia, Memnon, is a powerful example of this fascination. According to the myths, Memnon was a great warrior and the son of Eos, the goddess of the dawn. He was not just a regular person, he was a hero of great importance, often described as very beautiful and a very skilled warrior. The Aethiopis, a lost epic poem from the Trojan War cycle, was written about his story because it was so important. In this epic, Memnon, the son of Eos, the goddess of the dawn, comes to Troy with a huge army of African and other soldiers to protect it. His arrival on the battlefield was a big deal, showing how powerful he was and how far his kingdom reached. People thought Memnon was a match for Achilles, the greatest Greek hero of all time. In their epic duel, Memnon even managed to hurt the seemingly invincible warrior before finally losing. Busiris, a mythical king of Egypt, is another figure from Africa immortalized in Greek mythology. The stories say that Busiris started killing all foreigners who came into his kingdom in a last-ditch effort to end a famine. Heracles, the greatest Greek hero, put an end to this cruel practice by breaking his chains and killing the tyrannical king. What is interesting is how Greek art showed this myth. A Caeritan hydria, a type of water jar from around 550 BCE and attributed to the Busiris painter, shows this myth in great detail. The vase, which is now in the Kunsthistorisches Museum in Vienna, shows a strong Heracles defeating the king. His attendants and soldiers, all clearly shown as black Africans with tightly curled hair, rush to help him in a chaotic scene. This artistic choice shows that Greeks linked the armies of Egypt and the lands beyond with African soldiers from a long time ago, which is something that historical records show to be true. The world of myth gives us a fascinating look into how the Greeks thought, but the African presence in ancient Greece was not just a story. Herodotus, who is often called the father of history, wrote about it as a real thing. Herodotus, who lived in the 5th century BC, wrote some of the most interesting and complete accounts of Africans in the ancient world, bringing them from myth to history. The Histories, his book, is full of information that proves that Africans were not only known to the Greeks, but also took part in important events at the time. One of the most interesting examples is his story of the huge Persian invasion of Greece in 480 BC, which was led by the Emperor Xerxes. Herodotus carefully lists all the different groups that made up Xerxes' invading army. He gives the Ethiopians a special place on this list. He doesn't just mention them in passing, he goes into great detail about how they looked and what weapons they carried. Africans were on the European mainland and taking part in one of the most important wars in history. But what made these kinds of interactions so common? The answer is in the vast trade networks that linked the Mediterranean world to the center of Africa. The Nile River served as a major highway for hundreds of years, allowing people, goods, and ideas to flow freely between Egypt, Nubia, and the Greek world. Kush, a strong kingdom with its capital in Meroe, now in Sudan, was a major center in this network. Meroe was known for making iron, which gave its armies a big edge. It was also a gateway for many other African resources that were in high demand in Greece. This trade wasn't just one way. It was a two-way street that made both sides richer and created a strong, lasting bond. The Greeks, for their part, exported their own goods, such as wine, olive oil, and their beautifully made pottery. Archaeologists have found these items deep in Sudan, showing how far this ancient trade went. Nubia, which is often called the land of gold by its neighbors, was where a lot of this precious metal came from. It helped the economies of the Aegean and decorated their treasures. Starting in the 6th century BC, Greeks began to see more and more pictures of Africans on almost every type of art they made. We see their faces and bodies on vases, painted by famous artists like the Amasis painter and the Andakaides painter, on terracotta and bronze sculptures that are very detailed, and even on everyday things. These artists, who worked in the lively Keramikos, or Potter's Quarter of Athens, didn't just make up these figures. They were responding to a world where Africans were a well-known and visible part of life. These are not exaggerated or scary characters from a made-up world. They are nuanced, realistic, and often deeply human portrayals that say a lot about how Greeks saw Africans. The artists painted them with a clear-eyed realism, paying close attention to their unique physical traits, such as their skin color and tightly curled hair, in a way that makes it seem like they were watching them directly. The Janiform vase, which has two faces back to back, is one of the most interesting types of this kind of art. A common combination on these vases, like the famous alabastron from the Berlin State Museums, number 3382, was the head of a black African on one side and a white European, usually a Thracian or Scythian, on the other. This piece, which is from around 490 to 480 BC, shows an Ethiopian warrior next to a Scythian woman. The two people are from the most exotic ends of the Greek world, which is what the artist wanted. This comparison was not meant to make people feel like they were in a fight or a hierarchy. Instead, it was a celebration of the world as the Greeks saw it, showing how different people are. It put Africans in the same family as everyone else and made them a familiar face from a faraway but connected place. These vases were common in homes and tombs all over the Greek world. They were a daily reminder of how many different cultures lived together at the time. Africans were present in ancient Greece, in more ways than just mythology, war, and trade. It got to the very heart of Greek intellectual life. We often think of the philosophical schools of Athens as being only Greek, but the historical record shows that this is not the case. People from all over the world, including Africa, were interested in the ideas of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. The ancient biographer Diogenes Laertius, in his work Lives of the Eminent Philosophers, offers an intriguing and frequently neglected piece of evidence. He lists the followers of the philosopher Aristippus of Cyrene, who was a student of Socrates and started the Cyrenaic school of philosophy in the 4th century BC. It is important to note that Aristippus was from Cyrene, a major city in North Africa, now Libya. This area has strong ties to the interior of Africa. One of them is a man named Ethiops of Ptolemais, who is said to have studied alongside a child of Aristippus. Ethiops is a clear and direct reference to his African roots. Ptolemais was a big city in Cyrenaica, which is now Libya. Ethiop's inclusion in this philosophical lineage is not a mere footnote. It situates an African thinker within the intellectual milieu of ancient Greece, examining and interacting with the hedonistic philosophy of the Cyrenaics. This philosophy, which said that pleasure was the most important thing, had a wide range of followers. The fact that an African philosopher was a part of it shows how cosmopolitan the Hellenistic world was. It tells us that geography and race didn't stop people from wanting to learn. It would not be surprising or need any special reason for an African man to be a respected member of a Greek philosophical school. He was, in short, a philosopher among philosophers. This conversation was part of a larger social scene where Africans were common, though not always in large numbers. They weren't all the same. They were people from different backgrounds who all ended up in Greece in different ways. Some were diplomats sent on missions by the strong kingdoms of Nubia and Meroe. Some were soldiers who fought in Greek armies as mercenaries or as allies, as we saw in the Persian Wars. Many were athletes who were known for their strength and competed in the famous Greek games. And as the art shows, many of them were musicians, entertainers, and servants who were a big part of daily life in Greek cities. However, it is important to know how the Greeks saw these differences. The contemporary notion of race, characterized by inflexible biological classifications and intrinsic hierarchies, was absent in ancient societies. Christopher Stedman Parmenter, a scholar, gives a more detailed interpretation in his book Racialized Commodities. He contends that the Greek perception of various peoples constituted a complex racial imaginary, amalgamating concepts of geography, the provenance of trade goods, and physical appearance. From this perspective, the initial depictions of Africans in Greek art were not designed as instruments of oppression. Instead, they were a side effect of long-distance trade. The Greeks linked certain items, like ebony and ivory, to certain places and the people who lived there. In this way, the blackness of an African was like the gray-eyed description of a Thracian. It was another trait of someone from a faraway, interesting place. This does not imply that the Greeks were oblivious to physical disparities or devoid of any prejudice. They definitely had stereotypes about different groups, and these were often based on where they lived and the weather. People from the cold northern lands of Scythia were often thought to be wild and uncivilized, but people from the hot south were seen in a different light. But as the famous classicist Frank M. Snowden Jr. convincingly argued in his groundbreaking books Blacks in Antiquity and Before Color Prejudice, this was not the same as modern racism. The Greeks and Romans of old did not think that skin color was bad. People didn't discriminate against black people in a big, organized way. People judged an Ethiopian by his character, skills, or social status, not by the color of his skin. This ancient viewpoint sharply contrasts with the racial prejudices that would arise millennia later. Frank Snowden's research offers a compelling rebuttal to the notion that racism is a permanent and immutable aspect of human society. He shows that in the Greco-Roman world, a person's character and skills were the most important things about them. An Ethiopian could be a great soldier, a great diplomat, or a great philosopher like Memnon or Ethiops of Ptolemaios. Their skin color was a notable feature that artists made sure to get right, but the Greeks didn't think it made them less valuable or limited their potential. This is an important point. The Greeks didn't see races as a hierarchy, but as a world of different peoples. This mindset is even present in their faith. Early Christianity, which came from the Greco-Roman culture, saw the Ethiopian as a symbol of its universal mission. The story of the Ethiopian eunuch in the Acts of the Apostles is a strong example. He was a high-ranking official in the court of the Kandake, or Queen of Ethiopia, and Philip, the apostle, converted and baptized him. His conversion represented the dissemination of the Christian message to the ends of the earth, with his African identity being a pivotal aspect of this symbolism. There was no doubt or question about whether a black man could be a full and equal member of the new faith. His addition was a well-known event that came true. The proof is too much to ignore. The African presence in ancient Greece is clear in everything from the myths of godlike warriors to the detailed accounts of historians, from the bright images on pottery to the quiet records of philosophical schools. It was a presence that was complicated, had many sides, and was deeply woven into Greek society. Africans were not just far-off trading partners or interesting oddities. They were soldiers, scholars, athletes, and artists who made the classical world what it was. Their narratives contest contemporary notions of race and identity, unveiling a history that was significantly more interconnected and cosmopolitan than commonly perceived. This long and rich history of interaction didn't end when classical Greece fell apart. The link between Africa and the Mediterranean world didn't fade away when classical Greece fell. It got stronger and bigger under the huge and powerful Roman Empire. The Romans had a lot of contact with people from Africa, especially Egypt, Nubia, and the areas they called Mauritania and Numidia. They also admired and learned a lot from the Greek way of thinking. The Romans, who took a lot of their ideas from the Greeks, also had a lot of contact with people from Africa, especially Egypt and Nubia. African soldiers, especially the famous Numidian cavalry, were in high demand and served as extra troops in Roman legions all over the empire, from the cold frontiers of Britain to the deserts of the Middle East. These skilled horsemen were known for their speed and guerrilla tactics, and they were very important in many of Rome's military campaigns. African scholars and intellectuals continued to influence the intellectual landscape of the Roman Empire. Why has this history been so often ignored? As Europe entered the age of colonialism and the transatlantic slave trade in the following centuries, a new and dangerous kind of racism emerged. A new idea was made up to explain the brutal exploitation of African people. This idea said that Africa had no history and that its people were naturally inferior. In this new way of looking at the world, the great kingdoms of Kush and Meroe, the brave hero Memnon, and the Ethiopian philosopher Ethiops were all forgotten. The long history of interaction and respect for each other was purposefully forgotten and buried under layers of bias. To fit a new and wrong view of history, the colorful, multicultural world of the past was whitewashed, and its ties to Africa were erased. Restoring this lost history is not just about setting the record straight. It is about understanding how different cultures have interacted with each other over time in ways that are often surprising and complicated. It is about realizing that the roots of our modern world are much more varied than we usually think they are. The echoes of Africa in ancient Greece remind us that our histories are linked, our cultures are linked, and the story of humanity is one that we all share. Before we finish, we should point out a specific place that connects Africa and Greece, the island of Cyprus. Cyprus was a very important crossroads in the Eastern Mediterranean, where cultures from Africa, Asia, and Europe came together and mixed. Cyprus and Africa have been connected for a long time, before the classical period. Archaeological evidence shows that pictures of Africans were used in Cypriot art as early as the 2nd millennium BC. This makes them some of the earliest known images of Africans living outside of Africa. This is an amazing fact that happened more than 1,000 years before African figures became common on the Greek mainland. Because of its location, the island was a natural stopping point for trade routes that connected the Nile Valley to the Aegean. This constant flow of people and goods had a lasting effect on Cypriot culture. Herodotus himself said that the Ethiopians were one of the founding tribes of Cyprus. This shows how old and deep the connection between the island and Africa is. This wasn't just a trade deal, it shows that people were living and working together in a way that went beyond simple business transactions. Africans had been living in Cyprus for so long that they were seen as an important part of the island's identity. This link would last for hundreds of years. In the late Middle Ages, the cities of Nicosia and Famagusta became home to a lively group of scholars and pilgrims from Nubia and Ethiopia in the Middle Ages. These African intellectuals would go on to have a big impact on Rome during the Counter-Reformation, which shows how important the African presence in the Mediterranean world has been over time.